Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and welcome back to the bunker. This time, you made me watch a movie from 1947 called Dark Passage with Humphrey, Bogart, and Lauren Bacall, the real-life couple who did 4 movies together in which they played romantic couples, various kinds of films, including The Big Sleep, and this was requested by RockManLP, so thanks a bunch to you. I never go back this far. I very rarely review movies from this period in time, and I need to do more of that. I have never claimed to be a film buff on this channel. I have become a lot more well-rounded and learned a lot doing this, and thanks to a lot of requests from different folks pulling me outside of my comfort zone. This is another one of those. I've not watched a lot of thrillers and mystery films and crime dramas from this period. This movie fits all 3 of those categories, and this is not a movie that I would put in the noir category, but of course it has a lot in common with those kinds of films as well. This is a movie set in San Francisco, a really picturesque movie, gorgeous cinematography, really wonderful urban atmosphere about a convict played by Humphrey Bogart, whose face you don't see until well past the halfway point in the film, because he is an escaped convict who was convicted for the murder of his wife, and he breaks out of prison, and he ends up getting help from this woman who he doesn't know, who just believes that he's innocent and has been watching the news and is interested in his case because her father had a similar situation to what she thinks is going on anyway, that that he was wrongly convicted also for a murder, and so she sympathizes with him, and they of course fall in love throughout the course of the film. They have wonderful romantic chemistry. I don't think they're on screen enough together, but it's also impressive that as little screen time as they have, I'm buying the romance. And anyway, through the course of hiding out and being on the run from the police, he ends up going to get plastic surgery and gets his face changed. And so he's not portrayed by 2 different actors, and that could have been a really awkward kind of situation, because you do hear him speak quite a bit. So if he had been played by another actor, you would have needed to either, mask the voice, make it sound as similar as you could to the other guy, or have a voice, Humphrey Bogart's voice in somebody else's mouth. That all could have been, really strange, and this was a much smarter tack, which was to use the POV device, which was relatively new at the time. It had been done in a few films, Jekyll and Hyde a couple decades before it. I think the black and white Jekyll and Hyde, the first few minutes of that movie did it, and there were some other films that managed it as well. This is probably one of the best examples of it that I've seen, and a part of me almost wished that the whole movie had been shot that way. And it's a little bit inconsistent, which is my only problem with it, but from the very beginning, you get all of Humphrey Bogart's experiences. Vincent is his character's name. This is a story about Vincent and Irene, and Vincent is of course on the run from the police, and by the way, I appreciate that he makes a lot of mistakes. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He's not in his wheelhouse. We don't really know how he escaped from prison, and so I question whether he would have been able to do that or not, but this is a film that is not all that concerned with realism. I will say that the story is a little bit hackneyed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm not going to give too much away about this movie, because I'm sure a lot of you guys haven't seen it, and I certainly do recommend it. I'll go ahead and flip my sign green. I enjoyed this movie immensely, but there's this odd juxtaposition here where the story itself is really heightened and unlikely, and there are some odd story conveniences, particularly in how characters know each other that you wouldn't figure possibly could. With a city this size, I think this movie has it's a small world syndrome pretty hard, but the setting itself is very realistic, and in the moment, it's very visceral, and it feels like things are really happening to this character, to Vincent, and a lot of that, again, is because of that first-person perspective, which is employed really impressively well and is not too gimmicky, like you might expect it to be. It gives you a really good sense of urgency. It feels almost like a second-person kind of thing, where it's really easy to put yourself in the action and feel like you are the guy on the run. And I imagine in 1947, that's you're imagining you're the fugitive. And I would bet in 1947 that is a real novel experience, and that probably helped to really set this movie apart. There are a couple of scenes, particularly when Vincent is in a taxi cab just before he gets his face changed, which, I don't know if this is, by the way, the first time that ever happens. That becomes a big trope in a lot of TV shows that I've seen, where you have that episode, like Smallville does it, Birds of Prey did it. You have that episode where you have like a gangster or a con man or someone who is a fugitive from the law, or someone's out to kill him, and he gets he gets plastic surgery, he gets his face changed so that he can be played by a different actor, and very often that's done because you can't get the actor back. Like that happened in Smallville with Rutger Hauer. And with this, of course, that's not the situation. It's one movie, and it's a Humphrey Bogart star vehicle. One thing I really appreciate, by the way, is that Bogart is not worried about not being on screen too much. He doesn't seem to have too much of an ego with this, which is kind of neat. Like, he's not on camera that much, really the third act, for the most part. Like, even, I'm jumping around a little bit, but even after the first-person POV thing, once he gets plastic surgery, we back the camera off and we start doing more traditional shots. But even after that, he's wrapped up in bandages, his whole face, for a good 15-20 minutes of the movie. So, yeah, not a lot of ego from Bogart's part, it seems here. And, anyway, I'll go back to the scene I was talking about. Vincent is in a taxi cab, and we do back the camera off in that shot, and you see his face in silhouette. And it's a real memorable, real artistic shot, and I love it, but I would have kept the camera first-person POV the entire time until finally he gets his plastic surgery. It feels as if the whole thing, just because it's more consistent and it continues to create that sense of urgency and that suspense. Throughout the film, we're supposed to wonder if Vincent actually murdered his wife. The answer to that is not surprising at all. There's a whodunit component to this movie, and the actual murderer of, because he's being set up throughout this, and the actual murderer is no surprise at all. That's a character that's established real early, and I called that pretty hard. Like I said, it's really difficult to buy some of the associations in this movie. Irene is the most interesting character in the film. She is this really strong, independent woman who is taking risks. And this whole movie is about taking risks, where she doesn't care if she gets caught because she believes in Vincent's innocence, but also she seems to just be really enraptured in his situation and kind of is liking the thrill of the chase and the thrill of being involved with a fugitive. And like, maybe she wouldn't have that same thrill if she thought he actually did it. She certainly wouldn't help him out if that were the case. And this movie seems to be a lot about people having a sense of a person's character just by looking at them and getting a first impression of them. And I don't know, by the way, that Bogart's performance really like helps that idea very much. I don't get the sincerity in it that I think the movie is going after. I feel like Bogart's kind of playing it too much like just a real standard part, like he might play any role, and I feel like he needed to emote a little bit more than he is. He seems a little bit too routine here, where he's not, once we actually get his face, he just does not seem too worried about anything, and yet the character absolutely is. He's making mistakes. There's a scene immediately after he finally leaves Irene and goes out into the wild, where he's relying on his new face to save him, where he goes into a diner, and right away he's almost found out, and that's supposed to be this really tense, really suspenseful scene. Oh man, is he gonna get taken in? What's gonna happen? And his performance is just too even keel in that scene. But anyway, so Irene, like I said, most interesting character in the movie. I feel like maybe it even would have been served if she had been the protagonist, the main character of the piece, because Bogart is kind of, I mean, he doesn't really have a character arc in the film. It's more of just a, will he or won't he escape, did he do it or not, kind of story, and it's a pretty procedural kind of plot. Like, I think what's more interesting is how he impacts her life, and the status quo break for her, where she's just kind of, living a regular life. Nothing especially interesting is going on with her, and she seems to me, if I'm not reading too far into it, she seems to be kind of craving some excitement, looking for some adventure in her life, and this gives her that. And again, she's not on screen as much as I think she probably should be. And I was just kind of enamored with her performance and more impressed with her than I was Bogart. And he's good, don't get me wrong. I just feel like he's not playing the character the way it is on the page, and the way he seemed to be playing it more behind the camera. Not to say necessarily that he's carrying the camera around. I don't know how exactly this was filmed, but it is his voice behind the camera, and there's more of a sense of urgency and uncertainty to that before we finally get his face. And the reason that she's going after Vincent and trying to help him out doesn't have anything to do with the fact that she is an acquaintance with a woman who everybody hates, who drives everybody nuts. It seems like this archetype is in a lot of these older movies. The woman who is really self-absorbed and is constantly nosy and getting in people's business and that nobody wants around. She used to be engaged to Vincent. That seems really convenient to me. That association doesn't seem to have anything to do with Irene's interest in him and why she's helping him out. And yet the story needs all these characters to be intrinsically linked in order to, easily map out the plot, and that's my biggest issue with it. I don't think they should have known each other at all, or if they did, that should have had more to do with why she was helping Vincent out. I was really surprised when we finally find out that Madge, this random irritating woman that Irene knows, used to be engaged to Vincent. And so that struck me as pretty hammy and kind of hackneyed. But this movie is not afraid of anything, except to make its protagonist flawed, besides just like mistakes he'll make in the moment. I feel like he is maybe a little bit too perfect, but besides that, it's nice to watch a movie like this before things were too censored. This is a movie for adults. It is, again, a thriller, and it's got some moments that, I don't mean to say that I squirmed at any time watching this movie, but it has a couple of moments where I'm like, oh wow, I'm really surprised they went that far. You know, with the violence, particularly, and blood in one scene. And I'm not saying it's a good movie because it's willing to do those things, but they serve the story. It feels more real and believable, especially with this somewhat hackneyed plot. That helps to kind of elevate this somewhat goofy story to something that is a little bit easier to swallow, and where I'm more on the edge of my seat and worried for my characters. So that's really nice. I wonder if one of the reasons Rockman asked me to watch this is because of the plastic surgery scene and the other ways in which this movie kind of reminds me of Batman '89. Obviously, just the time period it's set in, where the kinds of hats and suits that everybody's wearing, this feels like the kind of stuff that '89 was harkening back to, with its kind of 40s and 50s gangster aesthetic. But that doctor has very much that, like, you see what I have to work with kind of vibe from '89, which really cracked me up. And even some of the moodiness and the cinematography reminds me a little bit of '89. And I doubt, seriously, this isn't a movie I've ever heard anybody talk about. I think this is kind of one of the sort of lesser Bogart movies, or it flies under the radar. So I would be really surprised if Tim Burton was actually looking at this movie specifically. But certainly these kinds of movies, you know, they were throwing back to. And I enjoyed this immensely. Like I said, again, I am feeling it much more for atmosphere and for the way the movie is shot, and you know, shot composition, and also soundtrack. This movie has some swing classics that I guess wouldn't have been classics yet. They would have been, you know, more recent at this time. But one of my favorite jazz songs, "Someone to Watch Over Me," is featured in this movie, and a couple of other really great jazz and swing songs. But I certainly was wrapped up in the mood of it, but taken out a little bit by some of the easy story conveniences. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Sure appreciate it. I will see you again next week with another one. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan, and see you again next time, guys. Bye.